Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your virtual Sunday school class. I'm Griffin. I think Mark was technically scheduled, but when we first made the schedule, we forgot that last week was our brunch. So I think everything's been shifted back a week, something like that. So it was me this week who was tabbed to lead this class. What we're talking about today is Hebrews. And something that this lesson pushes is how Hebrews is really complicated. And something that made me think about what's a really complicated question I've gotten in my life before. And so I was thinking, and I thought of my first job interview I ever got. So it was to work at a restaurant, and I worked at that restaurant for 3 years or something like that. And the first thing that happened was, well, my cousin texted me. He worked at this restaurant too, and he texted me and said, hey, do you want a job? And I said, sure, yeah. I wanted something to help pay for gas money, things like that, so I could afford to go drive and, do some more fun things. Most teenagers have that desire to work for that reason. So I drove down to this restaurant 5 minutes from my house. I'm wearing a button-up, if I remember, in khakis or something like that. Pretty reasonable things for a job interview at a casual restaurant. And the manager, his name is Robert Brown, and I will never forget Robert. He was very interesting, a unique man, I will say. And he sat me down at this table, and I had kind of gathered myself, and I was prepared, and I had kind of walked through answers. But I thought the first thing that he might ask me would be something like, well, Griffin, tell me about yourself. Tell me what you're doing in school. I, of course, was in high school. And Robert did not do any of those things. The first thing that Robert asked me was, why should I hire you? And so, as a teenager, of course, I was very nervous. I had never done this before. And I did not expect that question because I felt unqualified, because the number one thing that most casual jobs want is for you to have some kind of experience. Of course, the question always is, how do you get experience if it's your first job? How are you supposed to gain experience if you can't get hired without experience? So, of course, I kind of breathed for a split second, and then I launched into this, monologue of sorts, talking about, well, I'm a good student. I'm in honors courses, and I have good attention to detail, and I have a good work ethic, and I try to be on time. That did not end up being true. But I came to work, and he kind of nodded, and then he asked me another question, and I don't even remember what it was. And then I think he asked me maybe one more, and then he went into the back, and he wrote me in on the schedule, and that was that. And so I had kind of built this experience up because, I had no idea what to expect. I didn't know what Robert was going to ask me. I didn't know who would interview me even. And I was so nervous because I felt like I wasn't qualified. I felt like I didn't have what it took to get hired to work anywhere because I hadn't had any experience in doing it. That, of course, ended up being not true. I ended up working there, had a pretty good time, made my extra little fun money and paid for my gas and did all the things I wanted to, but I'll never forget that first job interview of sitting in that restaurant and feeling so nervous because I felt like I wasn't able to have the qualifications. So, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Hebrews today, especially Hebrews chapter 9 and then some parts of chapter 10. So Hebrews is very complex theologically. The author isn't named, but people think that it might have been someone like Paul, Barnabas, Apollos, and Luke. They could have been the authors potentially, and while we don't know the author, the message, however, is clear and focused. Hebrews explained that the Mosaic covenant relates to the new covenant, and that was foretold in Jeremiah chapter 31. The author shows that the regulations of the old covenant prefigured the sacrificial work of Jesus. Jesus is this high priest of this new covenant, which is talked about in Hebrews 8, and the forms of worship that he instituted under the new covenant were already foreshadowed by the old. Like a priest of the Mosaic covenant, Jesus enters a tabernacle to offer a sacrifice, but his tabernacle wasn't worldly. The old covenant priests were subject to sin and death, and their offerings were ineffective. They were mere shadows or just false imitations of Jesus' future sacrifice. Hebrews 9 and 10 that we're going to talk about today describe Christ's role as this high priest and his self-offering on our behalf. So I'm going to now read 9:23 through 10:4, and I'm going to break it up piecemeal, just like the lesson likes. So listen for the word of God. It was necessary then for the copies of the heavenly things to be purified with these sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. For Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with human hands that was only a copy of the true one. He entered heaven itself, now to appear for us in God's presence. Nor did he enter heaven to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that is not his own. Otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with sin by the sacrifice of himself, just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment. So Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. The law is only a shadow of the good things that are coming, not the realities themselves. For this reason, it can never, by the same sacrifices repeated endlessly year after year, make perfect those who draw near to worship. Otherwise, would they not have stopped being offered? For the worshipers would have been cleansed once for all and would no longer have felt guilty for their sins. But those sacrifices are an annual reminder of sins. It is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. So, Christ's priestly work fulfilled and transcended the old covenant patterns of worship. Since the earthly tabernacle that is described was counterpart with the heavenly one, and this earthly tabernacle, of course, was purified with animal sacrifices. Bulls and goats are mentioned by name. The cleansing of this heavenly tabernacle required a more precious sacrifice. Christ entered that heavenly tabernacle to offer up himself for us. Unlike earthly high priests who must offer the same sacrifices year after year, Christ sacrificed himself only once at the climax of redemptive history, is what this describes. His perfect sacrifice never needs repeating, so when he returns, it will be to bring the final deliverance of his people from the power of death. In Hebrews 10, 1 through 4, the author explains why Christ's sacrifice and priestly service were necessary. The law was merely intended to foreshadow the true purification that Christ would bring. Animal sacrifices of the old covenant were never sufficient on their own. To defend this claim, the writer points to the repetitive nature of past sacrifices. If they were truly effective at cleansing God's people, they wouldn't need to be repeated. So rather than purifying God's people, the animal sacrifices served to remind them of their need for more purification. In truth, the sacrifice of animals could never deal truly with human sinfulness. We required something